Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest installment of my Changing Lives series. Today, I have a very special guest, Allegra Chapman, and we are going to talk about a serious subject that we are both passionate about because we've been through it and we want to help other people. Um, First, just by way of introduction, I'm Wendy Gordon. My Substack is Changing Lives. It's about mental and spiritual health. And if you're not already familiar with it, you can check it out at wendygordon.substack.com. Just keep in mind that is Wendy with an I at the end instead of a Y. So would love to have you check it out and see what you think. I've also got information on that page about my private coaching services and the presentations I do to um, church groups or other organizations about mental health. Anyway, happy to be here. And my guest is Allegra Chapman. I'll let her share a little bit about herself and her work.
Thanks, Wendy. Hi, everybody. Yes, my name's Allegra. I am a writer, I'm an author, I'm a columnist, and I am also a creative therapy practitioner. So my Substack is really a collection of resources to support mental health and well-being through creativity, because I'm incredibly passionate about what an amazing force creativity can be in our lives. So my Substack is Creative Fix, and you can find me at yourcreativefix.substack.com. And yeah, you'll find all sorts of resources there around how to use creativity as a mental health tool and how to tap into your own creativity. And I am also autistic and ADHD. So a particular passion of mine is helping neurodivergent people and people who have physical or mental health challenges in their lives to be able to tap into their creativity, because very often the traditional ways of doing things don't really work for us. So I try to create a space there where people can kind of create outside the box a little bit and find their own ways of doing things rather than trying to follow anybody else's.
Wonderful. And that is actually a perfect segue because I also have ADHD and just found that out within the last couple of years. And that diagnosis is actually what led to my recovery from depression, because I had been on multiple different antidepressants over the course of a year trying to get out of a very severe depression, and spent almost that entire year desperately wanting to die and starting to seriously research ways to make that happen. And thankfully, out of frustration, when my mental health provider was back to, well, let's try this medication that I had already tried when we first started, I said nope, and found the wonderful provider that I have now and have had for the last couple of years or so. Anyway, during our initial conversation, she suggested that I try an ADHD medication, and didn't come out and say that she thought I might have ADHD, but just suggested that medication. And I was desperate enough to do anything anyone suggested. And that medication is actually, within a few weeks of taking it, I was noticeably better in terms of my depression symptoms and have been on it ever since. And it's just been a real game changer for me, as has learning more about ADHD. I really was woefully ignorant about it. No one had ever, over the course of my life in previous depressions, suggested that could be an issue. And I just thought ADHD, meant that you were hyperactive or that you needed extra time to do tests or schoolwork because you couldn't focus. And that was never me. I was a straight A student. I was one of the first ones finished with the test. Um, I was easily distracted, but I just was still an excellent student and wasn't hyper at all. So it never occurred to me, or apparently any of the professionals that I saw, that could be an issue. But now that I have read books like Dr. Gabor Mate's Scattered Minds and done other kinds of research, it's like, wow, this describes me perfectly. All these things that didn't make sense before and that I used to, see as I'm just lazy or there's something wrong with me, now it all makes sense. And anyway, you want to share a little bit about your journey? Look.
Yeah, I mean, I think so that so much of that resonates with me, and I'm sure a lot of other people watching this as well will recognize themselves in that, because I, there's a huge number of people, and I mean, especially women. And Wendy, you and I are both ladies of a certain age, and when we were children, people didn't even really think of ADHD or autism as being things that were really relevant for girls. It was hyperactive boys, like you say, the idea of boys who couldn't sit still and were always jumping around. And um, most of the research, as is so often the case with healthcare in general, so most of the research was done on boys and men. And so all of the kind of profiles that we had of what ADHD looked like, or what autism looked like, or what lots of different neurodivergences look like, was all based on a male presentation. And so it's only really been in recent years that people have started going, oh, it turns out there's like half the population who are different and do things differently. And it's not always the case that girls present differently with ADHD, but often girls tend to internalize the hyperactivity much more. So, the likes of you and I, who exactly the same as you, I did so well at school. So nobody kind of clocked that there was an issue because I was getting good grades. So, nobody was worried. And I was easily distracted, and I was often told off for chatting to other kids in class. But because I was doing well, they didn't really. And they put that down to me being kind of bright and maybe, just needing more of a challenge to keep me occupied.
Yes, bored. So that's why you were distracted. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that was part of it, but there was also like, I just cannot focus on one thing for that long. But yeah, I did well enough at school, so it was kind of not a problem. And I was first diagnosed with depression when I was 12, which was the first time that I was put on antidepressants. And
Same.
so I'm now 41, coming up for 42. So it's been nearly 30 years that I've been on this medication. And I only discovered that I was neurodivergent in my late 30s. So it's only been the last kind of few years that I've had this awareness. And that was something I kind of figured out for myself, just because I was researching it and reading about it. And I was going, no, that's not an ADHD thing, because everybody does that. And like, that's not an autistic thing, because I do that. Like, everyone does that. And after you've done this a few times, you eventually go, oh, wait, there's a pattern. Right. Maybe not everybody does it. Maybe it's just me. So I kind of, yeah. But then once you sort of realize that all the pieces fall into place and you go, oh my goodness, everything makes sense now. And I wonder now how much, so there's no doubt in my mind that being on antidepressants is helpful for me. And I wrote a piece recently about how I am continually coming off my meds, and it's always a bad idea. It always goes spectacularly wrong. I keep coming off them. So I know that I need to be on them, but I do wonder how much, and I think there's probably other people out there with a similar experience, how much I'm on maybe the right medication, but for the wrong reasons. Because I wonder if a lot of what's been happening, what I was dealing with, was more to do with undiagnosed neurodivergence and not kind of understanding how my brain worked, and not understanding why I wasn't the same as everybody else, and why things felt different for me than they did to everybody else. And so I wonder how different things would have been if at 12, which is the first time I sort of wanted to end my life, and the first time things got bad enough for me to be then, diagnosed with depression. I wonder if they at that point had the awareness and the knowledge that we have now about neurodiversity to go, wait, actually what's going on with you is this, instead, if that would have made a difference. But I mean, we'll never know.
Yes, I wonder that for myself as well, because like you, I experienced my first depression basically around puberty time when I was a teenager. And my entire life have been on antidepressants, and I would be on one, and then it would stop working, if you will, and I'd be on another. And at first, like you, when I would feel better, I would think, oh, great, I don't need this medication anymore. But thankfully, it only took me like once of, crashing within a month or two of going off the med to realize, okay, I do need to be on medication for life, probably, except that it kept happening that the antidepressants would stop working, and then they would try a new one, and none of them ever really made me feel fully well. They just made me functional where I wasn't wanting to die, basically. Um, and so, yeah, and I'm 56 now. And so it was like when I was 54 or so that I finally got this provider who put me on the ADHD med and explained to me the pharmacology behind it too and the similarities. And anyway, I won't go into that because I'm not a medical professional or a mental health professional. I want to make that very clear. I'm speaking from my experience, not suggesting that you get the medication that I'm on or anything like that. Please see a professional. Um, but yeah, it made all the difference for me. And of course, medication alone doesn't cure anything. I also, as I started to be less severely depressed, to go out and walk in the park and to journal every day and to do other healthy mental health things that I had just been so depressed that I didn't even get out of bed most days for a long time.
Yeah. And I think that's a really important point, I think, as well, because a lot of the advice, which is, often very well meaning and very well intentioned, is that if you're experiencing depression, what you need to do is get outside and you need to exercise and you need to do that. And those things are brilliant. Like, don't get me wrong. And I mean, exercise for me is really important. Time in nature outside is really important. Meditation, journaling, creativity, is massive. But all of those things are great for maintaining your mental health and looking after your mental health. But like you say, if you're in the middle of a serious depression, you can't get out and go for a walk. You can't go to the gym because you are not well and you are not capable of doing those things. So I think people need to realize I think people who don't experience depression, we've kind of devalued the words depression, I think, because a lot of people just use it to mean they feel a bit sad.
Yes.
And we kind of throw it around as an adjective, like, oh yeah, I'm depressed, but I'm depressed because I've had a bad day at work and I'll be better tomorrow. Like
Right.
that's not depression. That's you have had a bad day and you feel like crap, and that's just a normal kind of up and down of life. Depression is an illness, and when you are properly depressed, you cannot be, going out and doing these things. So I think there's a lot of misunderstanding from people who've never lived with the illness, who kind of think like, oh yeah, you can, you just, what you need to do is go for a walk and do some yoga, and and it's like that's really great for keeping yourself healthy, but it's not going to pull you out of.
And that advice, at least for me, always made me feel worse because I knew that I should do those things, that I would feel better if I did those things. But like you said, I was completely incapable of doing them. So that was just like one more dose of shame heaped on that, I'm this defective person who can't cope with life. And, I would have well-meaning people say things like, you should be grateful. You have it so much better than a lot of other people in the world. Again, that's true. And gratitude is a wonderful practice. At night now, I do make a gratitude list. But yeah, when you're in that state, it's not possible when you're severely depressed.
Yeah.
And as
Or
Go ahead.
sorry to interrupt, but I saw a great interview with Stephen Fry when he said loads of people say to him, like, how can you possibly be depressed because you've got all this money and fame and success, how can you get depressed? And he was like, that's a ridiculous question, because you wouldn't say to somebody with cancer, how can somebody like you have cancer when you've got
Right.
this? That's not how illness works. Like, anybody can get ill. It's not, it's not because, so the gratitude thing again is like, oh, but there's people who've got it worse. Yes, sure. That's not really what we're talking about. That's not how it works.
Yeah, another analogy that I like is that telling someone who's depressed to cheer up or look on the bright side is like telling someone in a wheelchair who's paralyzed to just stand up and walk. And Yeah, and the other thing I think people who haven't been through it don't understand is just how distorted your thinking becomes. When I was seriously considering suicide and starting to research the methods, and I was the whole, okay, which one is which percentage effective? I wanted to be sure it would work and I wouldn't, and thankfully, I did a lot of research and none of them were foolproof, and I wasn't willing to risk, continuing to live and uh, et cetera, in a bad way. But what people don't understand is, I have a loving husband. We've been married since 1991. He is my rock. He is wonderful beyond belief. He was incredibly supportive. He did all the right things, and so like making me promise every day when he left for work that I wouldn't try to harm myself. Um, and yet I still came very close to doing it anyway. It's not about people in your life missing the warning signs or not caring. It's about, in my own head, I legitimately believed that he would be better off without me, and that he would grieve for a time, sure, but he would get over it and go on to find a new wife who was, normal, and he would be much happier and better off with.
Yeah.
That's how sick the mind is when I was in that state.
Yeah. I see it a lot when, you sort of have high profile people who die by suicide, and people will say, oh, how could they do that when they have children? Or how could they do that with. And yeah, what you don't understand is how much your brain lies to you. And I think it's also really important for anybody who has lost somebody to suicide, because I know there's so much guilt that goes with that, and people think like, oh, I should have done something, I should have helped you. You can't. It's not. There's nothing you can do, and there's nothing that you are supposed to do. The same as you couldn't save somebody if they had cancer. You can be there for them, and you can be supportive, and you can love them, but ultimately, you can't heal them. It's a disease, and people survive it or they don't. And the only person who can do anything about that is you. And it's really hard because your brain is telling you. And I have so my husband is absolutely amazing. He's been incredible. And he's always been there for me and been really supportive when I've had dark times. I've got two beautiful children who I adore more than anything in this world. And when I'm well, obviously I go, yes, of course it would be the worst thing in the world if their mother died by suicide. That'd be a horrendous thing for them to deal with. But when I've been, and I wrote about it, which is how can we ended up doing this conversation. I wrote about the fact that over the summer, I really, I decided that it was best that I ended my life. And I was firmly convinced that they would all be much better off without me. And that's, your brain is telling you everybody will be happier if you're not here.
Yes.
Yes, they'll be sad. Of course, it will be sad for a bit, but in the long run, they'll be better off without you, and things will be better if you're not here. And, that is the narrative that is so strong in your head, that actually you being here is more damaging and more negative than you not being here.
Right.
And
You're a burden to them, and that they will never, be able to be happy as long as they have to deal with you, essentially.
yeah.
Um, and on top of that, for me, it was the financial drain of, because I was so depressed, I was incapable of working. I forced myself to for as long as I could, when I would go in the bathroom and cry at work, and sometimes sitting at my desk and try to hide it. And but yeah, you reach a point where it's simply not possible anymore. I was in such a state that I wasn't sleeping at all night. I was so anxious and depressed, and I was crying all the time, and all not even getting out of bed. And like you said, people who haven't been there, I mean, even myself now, when I'm well, I can look back and say, how could I possibly have thought that my husband would be better off without me, and that he would be fine if I committed suicide? He'd get over it. I mean, that's insane, right? And yes, it is, because that's an illness.
Yeah. But this is the thing. Our reality, like, we live inside our brains, so our reality is shaped by our thinking. And when your thinking goes haywire, and your brain is telling you one thing, how can you not believe that? Like, you can't step outside of your brain. So if your brain is telling you, and I mean the same thing, like financially as well. That was, my husband and I have life insurance. So if one of us dies, the mortgage on the house is paid off. So I was like, well, if I die, then the mortgage is paid off, and he doesn't have to worry about, the finances and all of this kind of stuff. And this would be so much better for them. And yeah, it all makes perfectly rational sense when you're in it, and that's how you're feeling. And it's really, really challenging to get out of that, because that's your reality. That's how you perceive the world, is inside your brain. And if your brain's lying to you, then it's, very, very difficult to get out of that.
Yes, one of my articles from way back when I first started my blog is titled Living with Depression and Learning to Challenge Its Lies. And the biggest lie, of course, is that, yeah, people would be better off without you. And also that the only way to end this unrelenting emotional pain is to end your life. Because for me, I was utterly convinced there was zero chance of a better future. Things would only get worse for me, or at best, I would remain in that utterly miserable existence. And I think, nowadays with everything that's going on in the world, it's even harder for a lot of people. Like even me now being relatively mentally healthy and doing the right things for my mental health. I mean, just the world is depressing. I avoid the news, I avoid social media, but you can't help but hear about, the latest mass shooting or the war or other horrible thing happening. And
Yeah. Oh my God. I mean, yeah, it's horrendous. And this is, we're exposed to it at such a level beyond. I mean, when I was a kid, like, bad things would happen and you would see it on the news, but you would see it then for like, 20 minutes, and then it would be over, and then you wouldn't hear about it until the next day and you get another update. But now it's quite like it's constant, and we're getting minute by minute update, or second by second update. And, all of these notifications on our phone, and everything is going so fast. It's such an assault on our nervous system.
yes.
And all of the algorithms are designed to make you angry and scared, because that's what keeps your attention. It keeps you scrolling. It keeps you clicking. So they make money off your attention. So they want to make you angry and scared, because that keeps you going. And so we just live in this constant bubble of like fear, and you don't hear the good things going on in the world. I mean, actually, there are probably as many bad things happening in the world as there ever were, and as many good things happening in the world as there ever were. But we don't hear about the good stuff, but we hear way more of the bad stuff. There is no doubt there is a lot of bad stuff, and there is no doubt that we need to be doing things. But we're
But yeah,
so
there's way more good stuff, like you said, and that doesn't get the media attention. Um,
yeah.
it's just, when I look for it, it's not hard to find good stuff. And they can be little simple things like someone smiling and saying hello. I've shared before how inspired I was in one of my walks at the park when a mom reached down and picked up a piece of trash from the grass, and her daughter, who was about 8 or 10, looked up at her mom and said, "Mom, you're my hero." And then behind them is the father, and he has one of those like pincher things where you don't have to use your hands to pick up the trash. And he was also picking up trash. And so not only did that warm my heart that they're doing this good deed, but as I was walking out of the park, I bent down and picked up trash because of their example. And there's so many things like that, so many ways of and inspirational stories of good news that don't get the coverage, that the breathless bad news. And it's not even just reporting the news, it's speculation about how much worse things are about to get. So it's stoking all these fears about the future without offering a positive alternative. Like, we could try this, or we could come together and do this. It's just reinforcing that, nothing you do is going to make enough of a difference. The problems are too big. It's hopeless. You're powerless. And so, yeah, no wonder, depression and anxiety rates are continuing to increase.
Right. I mean, but this is the thing. And I, what you have to understand about the world is that the system that we live in is built on fear and division. And so the powers that be are actively trying to make us feel scared and hopeless, and that, there's an enemy around every corner that we have to hate. So, we really need to be scared of all these.
Yes.
I mean, so well, I know you do in the US as well, but recently here in the UK, we've had a huge kind of rise in. There's a particular far right politician who has been stoking things up, and we've had riots, and we've had just a lot of racism, and it's been horrible. It's just been really horrible. And you watch it all play out, and it's so carefully orchestrated by these politicians. They know exactly what they're doing. Because if they can get you hating each other and attacking other people, you're busy looking at each other and you're not looking at them. You're not looking over here where they're,
Right.
quietly lining their pockets and their mates' pockets and sorting themselves out and dealing with everything. And you're looking over here, and so yeah, let's shout at immigrants. Let's shout at trans
Yes.
people. Let's worry about them. That's clearly the problem. And then meanwhile they're over here going, yeah, you guys carry on. I'm just more money for me. And
Sure.
this is it's designed this way. This system is very, very carefully structured to keep us doing this. So yeah, it thrives on us being depressed. And even just, the engine of capitalism
Yes.
works when you're being depressed, because if you feel bad about yourself, then you buy stuff.
Yes.
Because they will tell you, like, the reason you feel bad about yourself, Wendy, let me tell you, it's not in here. The reason you feel bad about yourself is because you don't have that new car, or it's because you're not, a size 10, or it's because you're not there. If
or
you
you
buy
just
this
need
stuff,
a vacation. Let's
yeah,
set you an expensive vacation. Then you'll feel all better.
jewelry, adultery, yeah, like it's all a bit. So just buy stuff.
Clothing, or gambling, or substances. There's always something you can do that's external that you need to pay for to feel better.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So it's stoking it constantly, like constantly chipping away at your self-esteem. And, I talk a lot about, obviously creativity is my kind of big passion, but again, the system undervalues and undermines creativity so much and tries to discourage people from being creative because they want you to be a passive consumer rather than a creator. And they don't want you having an imagination, and they don't want you thinking that things could be a different way, but they don't really want you to be healthy. Like it doesn't work for them if you are well. So yeah, the fact that people are depressed and anxious in our environment isn't an accident. This is,
Right.
This is a product of the system that we live in. This is how the system is designed. But yeah, more and more people now are being kind of pulled into it, but we've all been very carefully trained to blame ourselves. So we're all sitting here thinking, oh, I'm the problem, I'm defective, it's me that's the issue. And it's not. This is you were supposed to feel like this. The system has always planned for you to feel like this. And it's a really radical act, I think, to start really caring for your mental health and caring for your well-being and fighting back against that.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because before we did this live earlier this morning here, I am a volunteer co-facilitator for a support and depression and anxiety support group led by NAMI, which is National Alliance on Mental Illness here in the United States. And so they have a website with all kinds of free educational resources about mental illness and stuff for families and stuff for the people suffering from it. But anyway, that every single time we do this group on the first and third Fridays of every month, and every time the participants, the main thing they say is, I feel so much better now because I know, it's not just me. I feel less alone now. All of you are sharing similar struggles and experiences, and you've given me new ideas of things to try to feel better in a healthy way. And even as a co-facilitator now, the participants share ideas of things that help them feel better that I haven't tried yet or thought of. So it's so beneficial. And it's mostly about reducing the shame and the isolation. As you said, our cultures totally treat mental illness as an individual problem. No, there's nothing wrong with our toxic culture. There's nothing wrong with, we don't give you any paid sick leave, or we don't give you health care that you need to, or we, push on you, all you need to do is take this pill or lose the weight or buy the car or the house, or, there's always a cure that involves spending more money. And to be,
Absolutely. Sorry, I think this is why it's so important, like in these conversations that you're having, and your Substack and the writing that you do is so important, because normalizing these conversations and bringing it out into the open more is so important, so that people realize that this is a wider problem, and it's not just you. It can feel so lonely and isolating when you're dealing with it, and when you realize it's not just you, instantly you feel better. But also, I think throwing that spotlight on the fact that this is a broader problem, and this is a cultural issue. This is a society-wide issue. This is something that we need to address together, I think is such an important thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it also is part of the recovery process for me because, when you help someone else in any way, then you also help yourself feel better because you're making a positive contribution. Um, and so that's been a big thing for me too. Um, and and yeah, just having conversations like this. It's kind of funny now. I'm so used to being among people who are willing to be honest and vulnerable and talk about how we're really doing, that when I'm just out in society and someone says, "How are you?" and pauses long enough to get an answer, I start to answer honestly. And sometimes they're grateful and we have a great conversation, but most of the time they're shocked and they get that deer in the headlights look and they kind of slowly back away and have to go do something because I'm supposed to just say, "I'm fine. How are you?"
Yeah, it's so interesting. I'm half Italian, and I always make a joke of this when people tell me that they're learning Italian as a language, because in any language, one of the first things they will teach you how to say is hello, how are you? And I always say to any of my friends when they're learning it, I'm like, just when you are out in the wild in Italy, do not use that phrase unless you want to hear an answer, because Italian people are not like English people. It's obviously, we in this country, we're very reserved. And if someone says, how are you? You will say, I am fine. And you will all move on. And in Italy, if you say to somebody, how are you? They will tell you, essentially a great length. So I think and also, so the mix of me being A, half Italian, and B, ADHD means that I have a tendency to overshare and to answer these questions, quite honestly. And I think a lot of people are not ready for that. But it's again, it's really interesting sort of from a cultural point of view that in some places people are really happy to have those conversations, and it's very normalized and natural to be like, actually I feel like shit and this has happened and whatever. Whereas in other cultures it's like, no, we must never kind of talk about it. So yeah, I think just normalizing that. And I think it's great that you're answering it honestly, because that might then prompt somebody else to do the same when they're asked.
Yep. And it's also, I think, so intertwined with in the US at least, our whole productivity culture. We have made achievements and productivity into this idol, this god that we worship. And it plays into the capitalist system of we're all interchangeable cogs in the wheel. And so if one of us falls apart, then there's someone waiting to take that job and all is fine. The system is perpetuated. The billionaires still get their profit and they don't have to do the work themselves. And just so many ways that it's basically set up for us to fail. And if someone is homeless or, gets evicted because they lose their job and have no income, or in my case, I haven't had health insurance for the last several years. And thankfully, I have found creative ways and discovered that in many ways, I'm actually better off without it and spending less money. But that's such a countercultural message that, most people are horrified and, it's irresponsible not to have it. And well, I don't have the money. You want to pay my health insurance? Great. And even if you have health insurance in the United States, you can go bankrupt from medical bills because there are copays and there are things that the insurance doesn't cover. And then there's the whole issue of, can you even find a provider that accepts that insurance? And it's just a whole nightmare in so many ways. But we still want to blame the individual. It couldn't possibly be that, that person is legitimately trying desperately to find a job and no one will hire them. Or, because they've been unemployed for so long, they're homeless. And so now they don't have the right clothes. They don't have a place to shower. They don't have an address to list on an application. There's just so many ways that our society says, no, it's your fault. It can't possibly be our system that's broken.
Yeah, and it's really interesting how they've managed to do this great job of really kind of brainwashing us all to believe in that, because and I've got to say it was fascinating, like from this side of the pond, watching when Obama was in and kind of trying to sort of bring in a sort of a similar system to the healthcare system that we have, where it's free at the point of use, and Americans seemed genuinely outraged by that. And we were kind of watching, going, he's trying to give you free healthcare. Why are you angry about this? I don't understand. But it's so hardwired into us. Like you said, this whole idea that, you work for things and you earn them, and that's the badge of honor. And certainly I think from a neurodivergent perspective, and also, when you talk about things like disability and mental health, and the fact that it's kind of viewed, we've been so trained to view people with any kind of challenges in that area as somehow less than, because they're not contributing as much to the economy. So clearly, therefore, they are worth less than the people who do contribute. And it's like, I'm sorry, how have they managed to do this? How have they got us to the point that we all measure our own worth by how much we can contribute for them? Like,
Right.
how do you, it's like, I have to take my hat off to them. Like, it's an impressive feat to be like, yeah, no, you all have to judge yourselves by how much you can pay money to me, make money for me. I'm like, all right. But it goes so deep in us. And, like you say, if somebody then has an issue, then it's very much their fault, then it's their problem and they have to deal with it. And yeah, we've sort of kind of somehow managed to convince everybody that their whole worth should be based on their productivity and what they're kind of, contributing, as if that was the only thing that mattered. And it makes people so much less likely as well to then get help, because if you are struggling, you don't want to admit it because you see it as a failing. There's obviously something wrong with me, so I don't want to go and own up to it. And it makes it harder to get better because, like you were talking about earlier, you get stuck in that sort of shame spiral. So it's really counterproductive, but it's kind of just hardwired into that capitalist narrative, because for the point of view of the system, it doesn't matter if somebody is struggling because they can just be replaced, as long as everybody else is willing to accept the narrative that productivity is the only thing that matters.
Right.
Then we just kind of keep going. It's just, I don't know, it just infuriates me. How did we get here? How did we get out of here? Because it's really, it just feels like such an impossible thing, because when you kind of talk about how do we kind of fix, but how do we, get to a point where we're not having these, these struggles with our mental health and this kind of epidemic of depression and anxiety. How do we get out of this? And the only thing I can think of is that we need to dismantle capitalism and start again. And that feels like a really big job.
Yes. Yes, here in the United States, there are a lot of people that just believe it. If we had a different president, things would be okay, and they might well be significantly better. And the abuses of power might not be like right in our face so much; they'd be more hidden. Um, but the system has been broken from the beginning, from the founding of our country. I mean, it was founded by subjugating the indigenous people here before us, and then they're add the slavery on top of that, and all the things, right? So it's never truly been a country of liberty and justice for all. But those of us who are relatively privileged, like myself, because I'm white and I'm heterosexual, I do have to deal with the misogyny and the sexism of our patriarchal culture, but still I have it good compared to my friend who is uh Black, transgender, and atheist besides, because now in our country, of course, everyone is supposed to be a specific type of Christian. It's not even good enough to be Christian. There's this one narrow set of beliefs that's the only acceptable way. And yeah, so that's another layer of shame, is the religious shame that comes with depression. I literally fired one of my therapists when she prayed with me during a session for God to forgive me for my sin of doubt and not trusting God to provide. And even though I am a former pastor and um, still go to church now, even though I don't consider myself a Christian, I'm kind of like, I've said Christian adjacent, or, Jesus follower, because I do consider him a great spiritual teacher that we could all learn from. And he, if Christians actually followed his message of love for everyone, even their enemies, and some do, to be fair, or at least try to. Um, but yeah, it's just gotten warped into this, our side is God's side. And so if you're not on our side, you're evil and you're an enemy to be destroyed, uh, versus let's find some common ground and make everyone's lives better.
Yeah. I'm not religious at all. I was raised Catholic, obviously being Italian, but yeah, I'm not, I'm not religious, but it, again, like you, I think Jesus was a great teacher. I think we can learn a lot from Jesus, from Muhammad, from Buddha, from Martin Luther King. I think there have been some amazing, wonderful teachers that we could all learn from. And all of them essentially had the same message, which is you love other people and you treat other people with kindness. And I come back to the Martin Luther King quote over and over again, that darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate.
Yeah,
Only love can do that. And I just think that if you live by no other advice in your life, that is, and that sums it all up. And I think most of the teachings of Jesus and Muhammad and everybody else all sort of boils down to roughly the same thing, that, if you can approach other people with love, and it's not easy, because it's one thing to say, okay, I will love the people in my community and I will love the people around me, and that's all great. And then you start going, okay, well, now I have to love Donald Trump,
right.
Nigel Farage, and I'm like, oh, now it's feeling a lot less easy. Um, so that's, it's not like, I think we think of love as being this very fluffy, hippie sort of thing, and actually it's quite difficult, and it's quite a radical act, and it can be really hard. I don't think I'm a good enough person to feel love in my heart for Donald Trump, but I'll work on that. Um, but I don't think I'll ever get there. But if we can, that is what I guess we're working towards. And I think that's probably the most healing thing for all of us as well, is to try and let go of some of that anger and that hate that's been really intentionally stirred up in us. And this idea that there are people who are better and people who are worse, and, all of this kind of mentality, and start trying as much as possible to feel compassion for other people and to feel connection with other people. I think that's probably the most radical way you can live in this world right now.
I agree, and that's kind of where I see the way that I'm trying to make a positive difference right now, because for a while I just couldn't bear to even know anything about what was happening, because I was just trying to heal myself, and the all of that on top of it was too much. And then I was at that really angry fight back stage, and there's a place for that, and still is in my life, of the protest marches, and they trying to get laws changed or not passed in the first place, especially here in Texas. But in addition to that, it's like, okay, I want to be a force for positive change. I want to do good in the world. Not I want to be for things, not just against the bad stuff. And so, I started this Zoom groups on the first and third Sunday of each month, that are from 11 a.m. to noon Central, that are just free public conversations, where whoever is able to show up, we just talk about how current events are affecting us, but not from the standpoint of let's point fingers and talk about whose fault it is that we're in this mess. Let's talk about coping strategies that we each use to stay sane in an insane world, basically. And two, what are some positive things that we can do to make the world better? They may be small things, they may seem insignificant, but they're still bringing more love and light into the world, instead of just cursing the darkness, basically.
Yeah, and I love that kind of framing of it, of being, what are you for rather than what are you against? Because I think so much of, if you spend any time on social media or anything at the moment, it's all kind of about what you're against and what you're angry about. And, you have to call people out, and you have to be angry with the people who said the wrong things and so, whatever. And it's exhausting. And actually, if you focus on, what do you stand for and what are you in support of, then that's so much of a healthier place to approach it from, for your own self and, your own nervous system, in terms of not
Right.
getting angry all the time. But it's also, you're more likely to then, it's going to result in positive action, because you're going to go out and do something, rather than just being like, well, I hate you and you're wrong and how dare you. It becomes about like, well, what I want to see happen is this. And I think, for me, that's like, the thing that saved my life and the thing that has kept me here has been creativity and writing. And writing is my thing, but also making art. I mean, I'm a professional writer, and that's the thing I'm good at, and I'm a very terrible amateur artist, but I kind of feel like it doesn't matter, whether you're any good or not. It's just being able to express yourself and channel that into something and create something out of what you're feeling is so powerful. And that's why I do the work that I do, is, to encourage people to have that creative outlet and to be able to kind of almost alchemize all of that fear and that shame and that anger and everything else that you're feeling into something else is such a powerful tool for you. But also, I think in this world where we are feeling like so many different people are being demonized or belittled or made to feel less than other people, having art as a tool at our disposal is so powerful, because when you share your perspective and you share your reality with the world, it chips away at that narrative that they have that, oh, well, these people are less than, or, they're not worthy of your respect, or they don't deserve, money or support from the state or whatever, because you're a real person then. And
Right.
if they can keep you quiet, then they can make you into this sort of shadowy figure that's either really dangerous or that's a freeloader or whatever they want the narrative to be. If people don't ever see you, then that never gets challenged and they can just go along with that. As soon as they see you, as soon as you have a human face and a human experience and they hear your story and they see the world through your eyes for a minute, suddenly you're real and they can't. It's so much harder to hate you then, and it's so much harder to demonize you and put you in a box. And the more that we can make space for that complexity of human experience and we can see those different perspectives, the more we chip away at those polarizing narratives. And the most important thing for me is to give power and space for people who are neurodivergent, who are disabled, who are, those are the big ones for me, because that's always been what helped me. But I want to see more of those people speaking out. I want to see more of their stories. I want to see more stories from queer people, from trans people, from immigrants, from people of color, from indigenous people. I want to see all of these stories coming out, because the more that we hear these different perspectives, the harder it is for people to put them in boxes.
Absolutely. And it works both ways, because as you mentioned earlier, loving Donald Trump is just beyond you. It's beyond me too. But I used to, and sometimes still fall into the trap of putting all of his supporters in the same camp. Well, anyone who would vote for him or defend anything he's done is automatically a racist, a misogynist, anti-immigrant, anti-LGBTQ, etc. And now I have a friend at church who is like one of a handful of people at our church who does support Donald Trump. And because I've gotten to know him as an individual and have these conversations and see, he is very dedicated to the Boy Scouts. He does all kinds of community service. He's a wonderful mentor. There are things I can admire about him, even though I think he's totally wrong on his political positions, and I still don't understand how anyone can support the things that Trump is doing. And the other piece is trying to be very clear in my own reactions and responses that I'm criticizing specific statements or actions versus the whole person, character assassination, personal insults, those kinds of things. And that I'm consistent in renouncing violence, whether it's coming from quote unquote my side or the other side. The personal insults, whether the verbal violence, and even more so the physical violence and the calls for, assassination or what other kind of, violent attack. For me, it's equally wrong, regardless of the motivation or the person who's doing it. And if we're not clear about that, then yeah, we're just adding more hate to the world, and we'll never make things better.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think this is the most important thing, and it's hard. It's really hard to do, because it's easy to just get into that, especially if you feel like you're getting attacked from one side. It's easy to just hurl and talk back. But then you become just as bad, and you're just part of the problem. So, and then they win. So, our version of Donald Trump is, we have Nigel Farage over here. who, and his party is called Reform, which is hilarious.
Yeah.
Um, but again, it becomes, I see it all the time with people talking about reform voters, as if that's an identity, as
Mm.
if that tells you everything you need to know about the person. And it's really easy to fall into that same thing and thinking, oh yeah, well, they're obviously a racist and this, that, and the other. And it takes, I think, a lot of effort to step back and go, well, they're 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 a complex person like every individual on this planet. Each person who has voted for reform is a complex human being. And there's lots of things going on in them. And there are reasons why they've been persuaded by this rhetoric. And if we don't ever make the effort to understand what those reasons are, then we will never be able to challenge that way of thinking, because, you know, we're proving them right. If we just keep yelling at them and go, well, you're a racist and
Right.
then they're going to retreat back into their kind of bubble and go, well, yeah, see, look, those people on the left are horrible. So clearly I'm right. And we just go round and round and round forever. So um, it's, yeah. And I mean, it's one of the scariest things that I saw. So, I mean, I've been a kind of on that many left wing protest marches in the UK in my time. So that Palestine has always been a hot topic
Here.
here, and it's something that's always kind of been in the news. You know, for I don't know, I went on my first protest march in like 2002, and there were 2001, and there were, you know, people with Palestinian flags then. So it's not a new issue, and it's always kind of been a big thing. But every so often you see it kind of, it bubbles up, and then you get people who, you know, I would love to see an end to the war, and I would love to see a free Palestinian state that is safe and secure. But what we can't, again, people are falling into is this thing of like, well, if you're pro-Palestine, then you have to be anti-Israel. And it becomes, you know, then again, just fighting. And we saw it over the summer at Glastonbury Festival. The 1 minute people are chanting Free Palestine, and the next minute the performer on stage has them all chanting Death to the IDF. And it's like, whoa, hang on, you can't claim to be against killing over here and then be encouraging killing over there. That's not, that's you're part of the same problem then. This isn't better. And I saw quite a lot of posts after that festival from people who were in that crowd and had been kind of whipped up into those chants, and they came away going like, oh my God, I don't know why I was doing that. But that herd mentality takes over, and people just get whipped up into the frenzy of like, oh well, yes, they're the enemy. And it takes such an effort, I think, for us to pull ourselves out of that way of thinking and start to go, what's the positive step forward here? Like, what's the solution? What's the action that we can take that's going to help, rather than just being part of this fight? But it's not, I mean, it's not easy when the whole world is geared up to make you feel like you have to fight.
And another saying that I like is, the world is changed by your example, not your opinion. And you know, at first, like years ago, when Trump was first starting to be popular and got elected the first time around, you know, I thought, well, if I can just you know, persuade people, and I can just present the facts to them, and will open their eyes, and they would never support this if they knew what was really happening. And sadly, that's not the case. But also, I have come to accept that there are some positions on the other side that, obviously, all of the extreme ones and the violence and the hate I reject. But there are some things, like, for instance, our Health and Human Services Secretary, RFK Jr., he is very bad at not wanting medical research. He discredits vaccines, claims they cause autism. Now is saying if women take Tylenol, which is acetaminophen, during pregnancy, you know, crazy things. But he also is rightly criticizing the pharmaceutical industry and their collusion with the FDA here, getting drugs approved with, and he's made it, he's outlawed certain food additives that are already illegal in Europe and many countries around the world for good reason. They're known to cause cancer or other health issues, but they've been allowed in our foods. And now he is the first person to stand up and say, no, we are not going to permit these in our foods. So there again, I can find a piece of that that I can support and agree with, and recognize the complexity, and that, someone that I'm quick to label as, totally bad, dangerous, horrible, even then there may be something that we can find common ground on. And
Yeah,
it's very
but
hard.
it is hard, but I think if you're coming at it from the standpoint of, all of these people are human and there is some common ground somewhere, then yeah, you can start to try and find it. But I think it's kind of it's that sort of mentality of thinking like you think of somebody as just as kind of all one thing. But really interesting what you said about the facts, wanting to kind of persuade people with facts, because I think all of us like to believe that we are right, and we need other people to see our side. We
Right.
need to see, and then once they understand that we're right and they're wrong, then they'll agree and everything will be fine. And the thing is, that is never, ever, ever going to happen, because, I mean, apart from anything else, there isn't, most of the time, there isn't an objective reality. Reality is much less black and white than we like to think. And
Right.
there is very rarely actually a clear right and wrong. Sometimes there is, but often, these things are more complex. So it's really rare that there is a right and a wrong, and that's the end of it. And even if there were, if somebody firmly believes the opposite to you, you're probably never ever going to persuade them, and you kind of need to be okay with that. And I think that's one of the areas where humans struggle the most, is we're not very good at just kind of letting go of the fact that we disagree and then trying to move forward, because we can argue all day long about, the rights and wrongs of a particular issue. But in the end, what am I going to get if I persuade you that I'm right? I will be happy, but will that have actually changed anything? Probably not. And I'm probably never going to persuade you that I'm right, and you're never going to persuade me that I'm right. So rather than us wasting
Right.
time going over it, actually, what's going to benefit us and humanity in general the most right now? What's the step forward beyond this? Because what happens and what the rights and wrongs are is we're never going to sort that out. So what do we do next, and how do we move forward? And that's, where we're probably finding it hard as a species to kind of to figure that out. But I think that's kind of, we need to
Goes
let go.
back to the mental health aspect of it, because our nervous systems are constantly at a low level of activation, of fear, of anxiety. And so I know for myself and everyone I've talked to about this, relatively minor things that normally would not set me off trigger a much more intense reaction now, because I'm already, just below that overwhelm, right? Um, and so that's part of the key and that's one reason I'm not on social media much at all. Even Substack Notes is becoming more and more social media, and I'm less and less active on it. But because the tendency is you're revved up in the moment, and so you instantly type that response to why they're wrong and bad, um, and it's like, as you said, what's the point? It keeps us in that constant state of fight or flight, and just nervous anxiety, energy, hate, back and forth blaming, and we never get to a solution or even something that would make things a little bit better. We just perpetuate the cycle and keep things bad.
Yeah. Somebody said to me once, you can be right or you can be happy,
Yeah.
but you probably can't be both, and you need to choose one. And I think about that, I think daily, because I think ultimately, yeah, I want to be right a lot of the time, but actually I would probably rather be happy
Right.
and move forward productively.
Yeah. And even in personal relationships, I've found that to be true with my husband. If we're arguing about something and I'm sure I'm right and want to convince him, and he's sure he's right and wants to convince me. And thankfully now, we've been married since 1991. So we've reached a point where we both realize, this is something trivial and it really doesn't matter which one of us is right. Do we really want to spend the energy interacting this way and yelling about it or whatever? Does it really matter? Usually not. Or is there some way we can compromise? If one of us wants to do one thing and one wants the other, okay, let's meet in the middle, or we'll do what you want to do this time, what I want to do next time, whatever, but not just endless arguing to make your point and prove why you're the right one, and why can't they see that, you know?
Yeah, 100%.
Well, it's already been an hour, hard to believe. I always love these conversations. And I guess the main thing, the main reason that I wanted to do this, and I think you did too, Allegra, is just to emphasize to people that there is always hope, no matter how hopeless things seem, and that your mind is lying to you if you're convinced that people would be better off without you, and that the only way out is death. That there is help available, and even if you have no financial resources, like in the United States, there's 988 national crisis line 24/7. Um, there are these NAMI groups. It's just NAMI.org for the national organization, with tons of free educational materials and online support groups and local in-person groups. Um, there are 12-step groups. Even if you're not a recovering addict, there are open 12-step groups that anyone can go to, and have a safe, confidential place to share struggles. There are just so many ways to get help, even when you think there's all these barriers why you can't get help, or you think you don't deserve help, or there's just no hope for you. I remember when I was super depressed, saying I'm broken beyond repair, and I absolutely believed that 100%. And here I am now, and I'm, co-leading the group that I was once just a participant in, and I'm sharing my story with the world without shame. And so, yeah, obviously recovery is possible, and worth the effort. I mean, I'm sure it's painful to go through therapy and to dig through the layers and the past events that have led to these negative beliefs, and challenge the self-talk and all the things. It's not easy or quick. And just the right medication isn't a magic cure-all either. There are lots of interrelated pieces, and yet it's absolutely worth it.
Yeah. And it's a lifelong
Yeah,
commitment.
journey.
It's not, you don't get magically better. But you learn tools and you learn better ways to look after yourself, and you get to know yourself, I think, better. You get to know your brain. And I should say as well, just to add to what you said, in the UK, if anybody's watching from there, we have Samaritans, which is free to speak to. You can speak to them on the phone or online. Mind have lots of resources that you can go to for help. And we do have free healthcare. So you can go and speak to your GP and get support from them. And doctors are so much better now at dealing with it, I think, than they used to be. So you get a lot more support and compassion than you once did. But yeah, I think a lot of it is learning your brain and learning how you work. And it's not easy. And I think life isn't easy. And I think it's one of the most important things that I just like to kind of leave people with, is that idea that, like you said, you're not broken. The system is broken. But it's a perfectly reasonable response to life to find it hard and to struggle, because it is hard and it is tough. And at the same time, it can be really beautiful and it can be really amazing. And however dark things are now, they turn around so quickly. Life can change in an instant, and things can be completely hopeless one moment and then absolutely amazing the next. So, the thing that I hold on to is, I am a soul having a human experience for this moment in time, and that will be over one day, and I can get as much out of it as I possibly can right now. So I may as well stick around and see what else there is to be had from it until it's over, even though sometimes it is hard work.
Yes. And like you said, even on the my most horrible days, when I was at my lowest depression wise, there would still be little glimmers. There might be only one bright moment, and the other 23 hours and 59 minutes of the day were awful. But you could still find something good if you look for it. I think, our brains naturally focus on the bad, and our society encourages us to do that, as we talked about earlier, so they can sell us cures. But nevertheless, there's a lot more good in the world. Um, I have started there's a newsletter called Reasons to Be Cheerful that only shares good news from around the world. Um, There's CNN Five Things newsletter that's the same, and also their websites. That is nothing but feel good stories that are true stories and inspirational. And Revolutionary Love Project.org. I think it's just revolutionarylove.org. But anyway, is a wonderful resource. Valerie Carr is a Sikh activist whose friend after 9/11 was one of the first hate crime murders. They wore turbans, so it was assumed to be Muslim. But she has a wonderful book called See No Stranger that emphasizes that every person out there um, is a part of ourselves that we haven't met or haven't, come to terms with, that we all have our wounds, in order to really transform society and the world, we can't just say, oh, well, if the oppressed get in power and become the oppressors, then it's fair or then it's right. We have to include the abusers in the healing, as hard as that is. And that doesn't mean they're not holding them accountable. But, we just have to realize that underneath it all, we're all humans. We all struggle with feelings of not being enough. And whether we try to mask that or like become the powerful one or see ourselves as the helpless victims, there's still the humanness underneath it. And we really are all one. And we can come together if we are determined to do that. And we have to start with ourselves. We can't change anyone but ourselves. And if we come from it from an unhealthy place of that reactivity and responding to hate with more hate, then yeah, it'll never get better. So on that note, thank you so much, Allegra. It's been a wonderful conversation. I appreciate your willingness to be open about this too. And I hope that we help some people who joined us live or will watch this replay later. Bye, everyone.
Thanks so much. Bye.